The alert hit my phone at 12:43 a.m., one sharp chime. Then another. I was half asleep on the couch in my study, with the TV muted and rain tapping the glass wall behind me. For a second, I thought it was a delivery driver lost at the wrong address. Then I opened the gate camera. Two figures stood under the stone pillar light, washed pale by the lens. A man with one hand pressed against the bars. A woman hugging herself against the cold. Headlights idled behind them, throwing long gold beams across the wet driveway. I knew those faces before the camera focused. My father looked older, smaller somehow. My mother's hair, once always pinned tight, was hanging loose in damp strands around her cheeks. They were at my gate. The same parents who told me I would never become anything. The same parents who threw me out at 18 with a duffel bag and $32. And now, after 7 years of silence, they weren't calling to curse me or command me. They were begging to be let in. I sat up so fast the blanket slid to the floor. The room was dark except for the blue glow of the security screen and the tiny amber light from the whiskey bottle on the shelf. Outside, the rain made silver streaks across the camera feed. My thumb hovered over the intercom button, but I didn't press it. Not yet. Because some things don't make sense in the first second. Some things hit you twice. First, as shock, then as memory. My father kept glancing over his shoulder toward the road, like he was afraid someone had followed them. My mother stepped closer to the speaker and said something the microphone didn't catch. Her lips were trembling. I zoomed in. That was when I noticed she was crying. Not dramatic crying, not the kind she used when she wanted sympathy from relatives. Real crying, messy, desperate. I should tell you that I had imagined this moment before, just not like this. Not in the middle of the night, not with rain shining on the hood of my black car. Not with their faces looking worn down by something heavier than pride. When people hear a setup like that, they usually expect one kind of story. A revenge story. A story where the kid who got humiliated grows up rich, opens the gate just long enough to smile, then shuts it in their parents' faces. Clean, satisfying, simple. But nothing about this felt simple. Because the word they used for me didn't just bounce off. It stayed worthless. That word can move into your bones if you hear it enough. It can sit beside you at job interviews. It can ride with you on buses at dawn. It can whisper over your shoulder when you finally hold something good in your hands and wonder how long before you lose it. By the time they showed up at my gate, I had built the kind of life they used to laugh at. A quiet house set back from the road. High walls, security cameras. A gate heavy enough to make a statement before anyone even reached the front door. Inside were the things I once thought belonged only to other people. Clean counters, paid bills, a fridge full of food, a bedroom no one could kick me out of. The kind of peace that doesn't come from luxury, but from knowing nobody in the world can unplug your safety with one angry sentence. I built all of that without them. Maybe because of them. That's the part that still tastes bitter. The people who called me useless had arrived only after other people had decided I had value. After employers did, clients did, banks did, strangers did. The world looked at me, stamped me approved, and suddenly the family that threw me away had found my address. How? Why now? And what had happened badly enough to bring them here in the rain? I finally pressed the audio button. Static cracked first, then breathing. My mother leaned toward the speaker. "Please," she said, and even through the distortion I heard the break in her voice. "Please, we need to talk. Not, I miss you. Not, we're sorry. We need." My father moved closer then, jaw tight, eyes avoiding the camera. For a second he looked exactly like the man from 7 years earlier, standing in the doorway with my bag at his feet, telling me maybe hunger would teach me what respect never did. Then the image shifted. The shoulders were bent now. The certainty was gone. "Open the gate," he said, not a command. A plea trying to sound like one. I stared at the screen, and all at once the years between 18 and tonight felt both enormous and paper-thin. The cold sidewalk where I first realized they meant it, the borrowed couches, the shifts that never seemed to end, the nights I promised myself I would never need them again, the slow climb, the first break, the first real win, the silence that followed, and now this. They had come back for something, not forgiveness, not love, something else. I stood, crossed the room, and looked out through the rain-dark glass toward the gate at the end of the drive. Two small figures under the light, waiting. I didn't know yet whether I was looking at justice, manipulation, or the beginning of one more wound, but I knew this much. Nobody drives across town after midnight to beg from the child they once called worthless unless something in their world has already collapsed. And whatever had collapsed was standing at my gate. When I saw them standing there, soaked and shrunken by age and worry, one memory came back first. Not the night they threw me out. The kitchen table, that old square table, had a burn mark near one corner from a pan my mother set down 2 hard years earlier. I used to trace that mark with my thumbnail while they talked at me. Not to me, at me. Report cards spread out. Bills stacked nearby. My father in his undershirt after work, smelling like engine oil and cigarette smoke. My mother tapping a red pen against the wood like she was grading my whole existence. That house had rules for everything. Shoes lined up straight, curtains opened by 7, no sleeping past 8 on weekends, no wasting time on hobbies unless those hobbies won trophies or looked good in front of relatives. Even laughter had timing. Too loud and you were disrespectful. Too quiet and you were hiding something. From the outside, we looked disciplined, solid, the kind of family neighbors praised. My mother kept the front steps scrubbed. My father never missed a work day. We took photos at weddings and ironed clothes and smiled like a catalog of good values. But inside, love worked more like a scoreboard. You could feel it in the air after grades came home. In the softness of my mother's voice when my older cousin made honor roll again, in how my father's shoulders seemed to rise with pride when other people's children became examples. Look at Daniel, he'd say. Look at your cousin Mira. Do you know how hard their parents worked? Those names were always in the room with me. Better children, cleaner children, focused children, children who apparently woke up each morning already grateful and ambitious and ready to become doctors, lawyers, engineers, something they could say proudly at church without lowering their voices. Then there was me. I was the one who stared out windows too long, the one filling notebook margins with designs, lyrics, plans, half-built ideas, the one who could work hard for hours on something I cared about, then freeze completely when forced into something that felt dead the second I touched it. I wasn't skipping life. I was trying to find a shape that fit. But in our house, uncertainty looked like rebellion, and softness looked like weakness. The word worthless didn't land all at once. It was assembled, piece by piece. First, it was little things said with a laugh, so I couldn't protest. Maybe your brain is still asleep. You'd lose your head if it wasn't attached. Some people are born driven. Some just drift. Then came the comparisons, sharpened into conclusions. Your brother never needed to be told twice. Your cousin works harder in one day than you do all week. Why are you always the problem? When I was 13, I showed my father a sketchbook I'd hidden for months. I had drawn storefront signs, room layouts, sneakers, album covers, whole apartment interiors from imagination. I remember the afternoon light through the blinds, making pale stripes across the page. He flipped through it for maybe 5 seconds. Then he closed it and pushed it back to me. So this is what you do instead of studying. That was it. Not ugly, not good, not tell me about this, just evidence. One more exhibit in the case against me. My mother was quieter, which somehow made her sharper. She knew how to cut with disappointment. She'd wash dishes without looking at me and say, I'm trying to understand what kind of future you think this leads to. Or she'd sigh when relatives asked about me and answer, he's still figuring himself out. Still? That word can humiliate you in front of a room. I started learning how to read faces before I entered them. Whether dinner would be calm, whether my father had heard from school, whether my mother had spoken to an aunt who had another success story to weaponize against me. I knew the sound of cabinet doors when she was angry. The difference between my father's heavy work boots and his fast, angry steps. The exact second silence stopped being safe. By 16, I had become careful in all the wrong ways. I apologized before speaking. I hid anything I loved until it was finished. I kept dreams private because once they were spoken, they became targets. And still, I tried. That's the part people miss when they hear a family call someone lazy. I tried in 100 invisible ways. I stayed up late, forcing myself through textbooks that blurred. I filled out plans I didn't believe in because they sounded respectable. I nodded through lectures about responsibility from people who had never once asked what I was actually afraid of. I was afraid of failing. Yes, but more than that, I was afraid they were right. At 18, I wasn't a slacker and I wasn't wild. I didn't drink. I didn't disappear for days. I wasn't stealing or crashing cars or asking them to clean up disasters. I was working part-time, stumbling through school, carrying a head full of ideas I couldn't explain in a language they respected. To them, that made me dangerous. Not because I was destructive, because I was disappointing. And in our house, disappointment had a smell. Burnt rice, cold tea, silence held too long. A television playing in the next room while nobody really watched it. You could live beside people every day and still feel yourself being slowly voted out. By the time the final fight came, I had already heard the verdict for years. That night only made it official. It happened on a Thursday in June, just after 6 in the evening. I remember the clock over the stove because the second hand had a tiny stutter in it. Tick, pause, tick. The whole house felt like it was waiting. My mother was at the counter slicing green onions into perfect little circles. My father had come home early, which was never a good sign. His lunch cooler was still on the floor by the door, and on the table, face down, was the envelope. I already knew what was in it. My exam results, not terrible by normal standards, bad by theirs. Bad enough to confirm every sentence they had rehearsed about me. I had failed the one exam my father had called my last chance to prove I was serious. He had said it that exact way 3 nights earlier. Standing in the hallway with one hand on the light switch, like he was delivering a final warning to a tenant. I had also made another mistake, a bigger one, in their eyes. That afternoon, before I came home, I had accepted more hours at the print shop where I worked part-time. Not because I wanted to give up, because I needed money, because school felt like quicksand, because a local designer who came in once a week had looked at some layouts I made for fun and said, "You've got an eye. If you stick with this, you could build something." I made the mistake of repeating that sentence at home. My father waited until my mother left the knife on the cutting board. Then he tapped the envelope with 2 fingers. "Open it," he said. My hands were already shaking. I pulled out the paper. He didn't need to read it. He saw my face and knew. My mother turned from the counter slowly, drying her hands with a dish towel. And in that second, I felt exactly like I had when I was 12 and caught bringing home a grade below an A. Except now I was legally an adult, which meant they could hurt me with consequences, not just words. "So," my father said, "you failed." I started to explain. I said it was one exam. I said I could retake it. I said I'd been working more. I said I was trying. That last line made him laugh. Trying. He leaned back in the chair and laughed once, hard through his nose, like I had insulted him with a joke. "Trying." He said, "You call this trying." My mother folded the dish towel into a square. Perfect edges. "And what is this I hear," she asked, "about you taking extra hours at that shop instead of focusing on school?" "It's not instead," I said. "I need the money." "For what?" My father snapped. "You eat here, you sleep here. You use our electricity, our water, our roof. You need money for what?" I should have stayed quiet. I know that now. But there comes a point where a person says the truth not because it will help, but because they're too tired to keep lying. "I don't think I want the path you picked," I said. The room changed, not loudly, just all at once. My mother's face emptied. My father went still in that dangerous way he had, where anger became colder instead of bigger. "What did you say?" I swallowed. I said, "I don't think this is for me. I'm good at design work. I could build." He slapped the table so hard the envelope jumped. "Build what?" he shouted. "Posters. Logos. Dreams." My mother stepped in then, but not to calm him. To join him. "Do you hear yourself?" she said. "At 18. After everything we've done, you fail your exam and come home talking about drawings. It's not drawings. Then what is it?" My father said. "Say it. Say the great future you think you deserve." The worst part was that I did. I tried. I said I wanted to work, save, maybe take courses later, maybe build freelance work, maybe do something real with the skills I actually had. My voice sounded small even to me. Their faces told me I had already lost. My father stood up. "You are lazy," he said. I said nothing. "You are ungrateful." Still nothing. Then he took one step closer and pointed straight at my chest. "And you are worthless if you think this family will carry you while you play at life." There it was. Clear, clean, no sarcasm. No softening laugh after. Just the word, finally spoken like a sentence that had been waiting years for its chance. My mother didn't object. She looked at me with a tired kind of disgust and said, "Maybe the world needs to teach you what we couldn't." I remember the buzzing of the refrigerator, the smell of onion and dish soap, the way the window over the sink had gone dark enough to reflect all 3 of us back like strangers. Then my father said the thing I had always secretly believed was only a threat. "Pack a bag." I stared at him. He stared back. "Tonight," he said, "if you think you're grown, then go be grown somewhere else." I waited for my mother to stop this. She didn't. She turned back to the counter and began gathering the chopped onions into a bowl. Like dinner still mattered. I packed in a blur, 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, underwear, socks, my charger, toothbrush, my sketchbook, hidden between folded clothes. I checked the coffee tin where I kept cash from the print shop. $32 and some coins. That was everything I had. I came back down with the duffel on my shoulder, still expecting someone to break. To say enough. To say sit down. To say we'll talk tomorrow. My father opened the front door. The porch light threw a hard yellow square onto the steps. Warm air outside. Distant sound of a dog barking 2 houses down. My bag felt absurdly light for something that was supposed to hold a life when I didn't move fast enough. He took the bag from me, set it outside, and said, "Don't come back until you learn your value." Then the door closed. Not slammed, closed, like a finished conversation. I stood on the porch for a few seconds, waiting for the lock to turn. And when it did, something inside me went strangely quiet. No tears, no shouting, just a blank, echoing kind of cold. I picked up the bag, walked to the sidewalk, and realized there was nowhere I was supposed to be anymore. That was the moment childhood ended. Not when the door shut. When I understood they meant it. I called 3 people before someone answered. The first call went straight to voicemail. The second rang until it stopped. On the third, my friend Marcus picked up with music blasting in the background and said, "Yo," like it was any normal night. I opened my mouth and nothing came out at first. I had to swallow twice before I could say, "Can I crash at your place?" He didn't ask questions right away, just said, "Yeah, come through." That saved me, maybe more than he knew. Marcus lived in a small apartment above a corner store that always smelled like frying oil and bleach. His building had a crooked stair rail wrapped in gray duct tape and a hallway light that flickered every few seconds like it was tired of trying. He opened the door in gym shorts and 1 sock, saw the bag on my shoulder, and his whole face changed. What happened? I gave him the edited version. We fought. They told me to leave. I just need a few nights. He looked past me into the hall as if my parents might be standing there ready to say this had all gone too far. Then he stepped aside and said, "Take the couch." I slept maybe an hour that first night. The couch springs pushed into my back. Marcus's old fan clicked every time it rotated left. Through the thin wall, I could hear his neighbor coughing and the low bass of some late-night TV show. I kept staring at the ceiling, expecting my phone to light up with a message from my mother, or my father, or anyone in my family saying, "Enough. Come home." Nothing came. By morning, my neck hurt and my pride hurt worse. Marcus tried to be casual about it. He poured cereal into 2 bowls, handed me one, and talked about a guy at work who got fired for showing up drunk. I knew he was trying to give me a normal morning. I appreciated that. But every spoonful felt borrowed. Every minute on that couch came with a clock ticking behind it. I left early with my duffel bag and told him I'd be out all day. That became the pattern. I'd spend hours walking the city with everything I owned on my shoulder. Print shops, grocery stores, warehouses, cafes with help wanted signs fading in the windows. I'd ask if they were hiring. Most people smiled politely before saying no. Some didn't even look up long enough to answer. A few took my resume and laid it on stacks where I could already see 100 others dying quietly. At noon, I'd count my money in bathroom stalls. 2 20s would have felt rich. I had crumpled singles, coins, and a transit card with barely enough for another ride. I learned which convenience stores sold the cheapest instant noodles, which bakeries discounted yesterday's bread at closing time, which public benches were far enough from busy sidewalks that no one would watch you eat like a stray. The worst part wasn't hunger. It was pretending. When Marcus asked, "You good?" I'd say, "Yeah, just sorting some stuff out." When the woman at the print shop said, "Still living with your folks?" I smiled and said, "For now." When relatives texted random family group messages about birthdays and church events, I stared at the screen and said nothing. I was homeless in a way people don't always recognize, because I had a couch for a little while and clean enough clothes and the energy to fake stability. That kind of not okay is easy for people to miss. A week in, Marcus's landlord posted a notice about unauthorized guests. It wasn't even aimed at me, but it landed like a warning shot. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck and said, "You know, you can stay a little longer. I don't want this becoming an issue." He looked guilty saying it. I told him I understood. I did understand. That's what made it lonely. People assume there's always a fallback. A parent, an aunt, a bedroom still painted in your old colors. Somewhere you can return if life goes sideways. But once your own home becomes the place you're not allowed to enter, Every decision changes shape. A bad shift matters more. A bus fare matters more. A stomachache matters more. Even getting sick feels dangerous when no one is obligated to care. On the 10th night, I sat outside a laundromat waiting for my clothes to dry because I couldn't afford to run the machine twice. My duffel bag was between my shoes. A little girl inside was pressing her face to the glass, drawing circles in the fog with her finger. Her mother laughed and pulled her away. I watched them leave together and felt something ugly rise in my throat. I took out my phone and opened my mother's contact. Just looked at it. Her name, the number I knew by heart. My thumb hovering over a call, I imagined what I would say: that I was sorry, that I'd do school their way, that I'd come home and keep my head down and earn my place again. I imagined my father answering instead. The silence before his voice. The satisfaction he would hear in my need. I closed the screen. That was the first real decision I made as an adult. Not about money, not about work, about dignity. If I called, I knew what I would be asking for. Not shelter. Permission to exist. So I picked up my still warm clothes, stuffed them into the bag, and made myself one promise under the buzz of that laundromat sign. I would sleep in borrowed rooms. I would miss meals. I would carry my whole life on my back if I had to. But I would never stand in front of that house and beg them to believe I had worth. The next morning, I ran out of places to hide from reality, which meant I needed work fast. Any work. Before the couch disappeared too, any work turned out to mean all kinds of work. For a while, I stacked boxers in a stockroom behind a discount clothing store. The back door stuck in humid weather, and the manager kicked it open with his heel every morning while drinking gas station coffee. The room smelled like cardboard dust and plastic wrap. My shifts started before sunrise. I'd unload shipments, sort inventory, sweep the floor, and try not to think about how my whole body throbbed by noon. That job lasted 3 weeks. Then came dishwashing at a diner off the highway. Grease in the air, steam on my face. Plates sliding toward me in towers that never seemed to shrink. At the end of each shift, my fingers looked wrinkled and ghost pale from hot water. I'd walk out after midnight smelling like fryer oil and old ketchup. Then catch the last bus with cooks, cleaners, and people too tired to make eye contact. I kept the print shop too, whenever they had hours. That was the only place where I felt even a little like myself. The hum of the large format printer, the neat stacks of vinyl, the color proofs under fluorescent light. I liked the precision of it. I liked that a design could start as a mess on screen and come out sharp, aligned, real. But liking something didn't mean it paid enough. So I worked. Everywhere I learned fast that exhaustion has layers. There's body tired, where your legs ache, climbing stairs. Then there's decision tired, where even choosing between soap and toothpaste at the store feels impossible, because both matter and you can only afford one. I lived inside both. I rented a room after Marcus's couch stopped being an option. Room was a generous word. It was a narrow space in a basement apartment owned by a retired couple who asked for cash and didn't ask questions. The ceiling was low enough that I could touch it with my palm. There was one tiny window at ground level. From bed, all I could see was a strip of sky and people's shoes passing by on the sidewalk. But it locked. That mattered. The first night in that room, I put my duffel bag on the floor, sat on the mattress, and listened to the pipes knock in the wall. I had one fork, 2 shirts hanging from a nail, and a loaf of bread on top of a mini fridge that rattled like it was coughing. It should have felt depressing. Instead, it felt earned. Then rent came due. That was the education nobody had prepared me for. I started writing every expense in a cheap spiral notebook. Bus fare, laundry, bread, eggs, phone bill, rent. If I bought a coffee, I wrote it down. If I wasted $3, I felt it for 2 days. I learned to cook rice 6 different ways. I learned that late fees are punishment for being poor. I learned that one missed shift can crack the whole month open. I also learned to control my face. At work, customers snapped fingers at me. Managers blamed whoever looked youngest. A supervisor once told me, "You should smile more. People tip better when you don't look miserable." I smiled. Not because he was right, because I needed the money more than I needed the argument. That was new for me. Not weakness. Restraint. The version of me who left home at 18 was still all exposed nerve. I took everything personally because everything felt personal. Every criticism sounded like my father. Every raised eyebrow sounded like my mother's sigh. If someone said I wasn't fast enough, smart enough, polished enough, the old shame arrived before reason could. But life didn't care how bruised I felt. Bills came anyway. So I got disciplined in ugly, practical ways. I set alarms for everything. I ironed one good shirt at night and hung it where steam wouldn't ruin it. I packed food before bed. I stopped waiting to feel motivated. If I had a shift, I went. If I had $10, I spent 6. If something went wrong, I fixed the next step before I let myself panic. That rhythm saved me. The person who nudged me out of pure survival was a woman named Alina at the print shop. She was in her 40s, wore silver rings on every finger, and had the kind of sharp eyes that noticed things you were trying to hide. She handled clients, corrected files, and somehow knew exactly when a deadline would explode before anyone else did. The first time she really looked at my work was after closing, when I stayed late cleaning up an order that had printed crooked. I had redone the layout without being asked. She stood behind me, chewing mint gum, and said, "Who fixed this?" I did. She pulled the proof closer. Black text on cream cardstock. Wedding invitation, tight margins. Better balance than the original file. She glanced at me, then back at the page. "You've been wasting yourself on rush jobs," she said. I almost laughed at the wording. Wasting yourself. It sounded too close to home. But she wasn't mocking me. She was irritated on my behalf. Over the next few weeks, she started leaving little things on my station. A book on typography, a link to free design software written on a sticky note. One afternoon, she asked why I was always rushing out between shifts. And for some reason, I told her more truth than I meant to. Not all of it, just enough. She listened without interrupting. Then she said the sentence that changed the direction of my life. "Stop thinking only about getting through this month." I looked at her like she'd said something luxurious and impossible. She tapped the monitor with one ringed finger. "You know what people like us do when no one hands us a ladder? We build a platform out of whatever is lying around, but only if we stop staring at the ground." That night, in my basement room, I opened my notebook expecting to write numbers. Instead, for the first time, I wrote a plan. The plan was clumsy, but it was mine. I wrote it across 2 pages in that same cheap spiral notebook between grocery totals and bus receipts. Learn software properly. Save for a better laptop. Build a portfolio. Take small freelance jobs. Leave one dead-end shift when design income could replace it. It looked almost childish on paper, too neat for the mess my life still was. But when I finished writing, something in me settled. Not confidence, direction. Until then, I had been reacting to life. Surviving whatever hit next. Rent due, shift changed. Phone bill, hunger, fatigue. Elena's sentence forced me to imagine movement instead of endurance. So I started treating my future like another job. One nobody would supervise, one nobody would praise. After morning shifts, I stayed late at the print shop if they let me. I watched how files were prepared for different materials. I learned why colors shifted from screen to print, why some logos looked cheap and others felt expensive before you could explain why. Alina showed me kerning, hierarchy, negative space, words I had never heard in my parents' house but instantly understood in my gut. At night, back in the basement room, I practiced. My old laptop wheezed like it was climbing stairs. The battery only lasted 20 minutes unplugged. One key stuck if I hit it too hard. I downloaded free versions of software, watched tutorials with headphones on, and redesigned fake menus, posters, shoeboxes, business cards, anything I could get my hands on. Sometimes I'd look up and realize it was 2:14 a.m. and I had to be awake again in 4 hours. I made a lot of ugly work. That matters. People like to skip to the part where the skill appears polished. Like talent was just hiding in a drawer waiting for the right soundtrack. Mine came out awkward. Overworked layouts, fonts fighting each other, colors too loud, ideas that looked better in my head than on screen. I sent sample work to 3 local businesses offering cheap design help and got ignored by all of them. Then I got my first yes. A barbershop on a side street wanted a new flyer and window sign. The owner paid me $50 cash and complained the whole time. He changed his mind 4 times about the colors. He wanted the text bigger, then smaller, then more bold, but not too much. I redid it until I hated the sight of clippers. But when I walked past that shop 2 weeks later and saw my design taped in the window, something hit me hard in the chest. I had made something real. Something people could see. Something no one could throw out of a house. That became the engine. Not proving my father wrong. Not winning some imaginary argument with my mother in my head. Those thoughts still showed up. Sure. Especially on nights when I was tired and angry and wanted success to mean they had to choke on every word they'd said. But slowly, a different hunger replaced that one. I didn't want applause from them anymore. I wanted ownership. A skill that traveled with me. A craft no one could lock behind a front door. A way of building value that didn't depend on anyone deciding I deserved a place at their table. So I got serious. I cut anything that drained time without giving something back. I stopped going out after shifts, even when coworkers invited me. I passed on cheap distractions that could become expensive habits. No drinking, no random spending to feel better for an hour. When people said, "You work too much," I smiled because they didn't know what working had become for me. It wasn't just labor. It was escape velocity. The sacrifices were ordinary enough to look invisible from the outside. Falling asleep in clothes because laundry could wait one more day. Eating rice and eggs 4 nights in a row to keep saving. Turning down a weekend trip because freelance deadlines mattered more. Keeping my phone on Do Not Disturb because one bad conversation could unravel my focus for a whole night. I lost sleep, I lost ease. I lost the version of youth where you assume someone will catch you if you fall. But I gained proof. A coffee shop logo, then social media graphics for a small gym, then menu boards for a takeout place. Elena started passing me tiny overflow jobs clients didn't want to pay agency prices for. "Don't embarrass me," she'd say, dropping a file onto my desk with a smirk. That was her version of belief. Not everything worked. One client vanished without paying. Another said my work looked too expensive, which I learned meant too good for the budget they wanted. I applied to a junior design role and got rejected after the second interview. The hiring manager told me I had instinct but no formal background. I nodded like it didn't sting. Then I went home and worked harder. That's how those years really looked. Not dramatic, not glamorous, just 1,000 quiet decisions made when no one was watching. Nights under fluorescent light, mornings with sore eyes. Tiny improvements stacked on top of each other until they stopped looking tiny. By 20, I had enough repeat clients to breathe a little. By 21, I was no longer asking if this path was real. I was asking how far I could take it. And once that question enters your life, everything starts to change, including the way the world starts seeing you. The first moment I knew fear had loosened its grip came from my bank app. Nothing cinematic, no fireworks, no dramatic music. Just me standing in line at a grocery store, basket in hand, waiting behind a woman arguing over a coupon for frozen peas. I checked my balance out of habit, already bracing for that familiar pinch in my stomach, and it wasn't there. For the first time, rent was covered before it was due. Utilities were covered. Food was covered. There was enough left over that buying coffee wouldn't mean subtracting somewhere else. I stared at the screen so long the cashier had to say, "You next," twice. I bought the coffee. That sounds small. It wasn't. It was the first time money stopped feeling like a predator breathing down my neck. By then, things had started moving faster. One of Elena's clients owned 3 restaurant locations and liked my redesign on a catering brochure enough to ask if I could handle all their menus, signage, and seasonal campaigns. I said yes before I fully knew how I'd manage it. Then I stayed up for 3 straight nights figuring it out. The project paid more than 2 months at the diner. When the invoice cleared, I sat on the edge of my bed in that basement room with my laptop open and just stared at the number. I remembered the blue light from the screen on the wall, the cheap blinds rattling because a train was passing somewhere nearby. My hand actually trembled when I refreshed the page, as if the money might disappear if I looked too hard. It didn't. That project became another, then another. Word spread in the quiet way it does when small business owners trust each other more than ads. I picked up branding work, packaging jobs, storefront redesigns, nothing famous, nothing glamorous, but steady, real. Clients began using words I had never heard, attached to my name before: reliable, sharp, professional. I moved out of the basement 6 months later. The apartment wasn't luxury, far from it. 3rd floor walk-up, beige walls, scratched hardwood, a radiator that hissed like it resented winter. But it had sunlight, real sunlight. In the mornings, it came through the kitchen window and made a bright square on the floor where dust floated like glitter. I signed the lease with a black pen that kept skipping. And when the landlord handed me the keys, I closed my fist around them so hard the metal edges dug into my palm. My place, mine. I bought a couch off a resale app, a table from a thrift store, and one framed print I absolutely did not need, but wanted because it made the apartment feel chosen instead of temporary. The first night there, I ate takeout sitting cross-legged on the floor because I had no chairs yet. Garlic noodles in a white cardboard box. City noise through the open window. My own silence around me. I should have felt healed. Instead, I felt something stranger. Proud, yes. Relieved, definitely. But underneath it was this hollow little ache I didn't know what to do with. Every milestone arrived with a shadow. Get the contract, hear my father's voice asking when I'd get a real job. Sign the lease, hear my mother asking if this was supposed to impress someone. Raise my rates, hear that old word slither up from years ago like it had been sleeping under the floorboards. Worthless. It's unsettling. Hearing your own success and your old shame speaking at the same time, people think achievement drowns that voice. Sometimes it just gives it a larger room to echo in. I had fantasies, of course, ugly ones, human ones. I imagined sending my parents pictures of the apartment keys, forwarding them invoices, pulling up outside their house in a car nicer than anything they expected from me, and watching them struggle to rewrite history in real time. In those fantasies, they finally looked embarrassed, finally looked small, finally understood. But every version of revenge I imagined still had them at the center. I was tired of that. The shift came one Sunday afternoon while I was unpacking dishes. A plate slipped from my hand and shattered in the sink. I froze, heart pounding way too hard for such a stupid thing. For a second, I felt 18 again, bracing for yelling from the next room, bracing for the accusation that I ruined everything I touched. No one came. No footsteps, no slammed door. Just me, my apartment, and the sound of ceramic pieces settling. I laughed then. Actually laughed, not because it was funny, because I realized how much of my nervous system still lived in a house I had not entered in years. That scared me more than struggle ever had. Money could solve rent, work could solve hunger, but if I built this whole life with them still dictating my worth from inside my head, then I was still living under their roof in the only way that mattered. So I did something I never thought I would do. I got help. Not dramatic movie help. No breakthrough montage. Just a quiet therapist's office with a gray lamp. A tissue box no one touched unless they had to. And a woman who asked careful questions I couldn't answer quickly. She taught me to notice what panic felt like before it took over. Two separate criticism from identity. To hear that old word and not automatically kneel to it. Healing was slower than hustle. Less visible to IC, but it changed the direction of my success. I stopped chasing bigger numbers just to feel safe for one more week. I started thinking years ahead. Systems, savings, better clients, stronger boundaries. A life designed, not merely escaped into N. Once I made that shift, the wins got larger. And so did the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming. After that, the years stopped feeling like emergencies and started feeling like construction. Not fast construction, not flashy, beam by beam, decision by decision. I kept the print shop job longer than I needed to because predictable income gave me room to choose clients instead of chasing every check. Then one spring, after running the numbers 12 different times, I gave notice. Alina hugged me with one arm, pretended not to get emotional, and said, "Good. You were getting too expensive for this place anyway." I laughed, but my throat tightened. Walking out of that shop on my last day felt different from leaving home. Back then, I'd been pushed. This time, I chose the door. I registered a business name that night at my kitchen table. The confirmation email landed at 11:08 p.m. I remember because I stared at the screen, hearing rain tick against the window, realizing I had just made something official with no one's permission. My own company, small, fragile, still mostly me and a laptop, but real. The work grew in layers. A restaurant group led to a local gym chain. The gym chain led to a developer who needed branding for a new mixed-use property. I learned how to speak in meetings without apologizing first, how to send contracts, how to say no to clients who wanted miracles on insulting budgets. I outsourced little things at first, a copywriter on a rush project, a photographer for one campaign, then a junior designer on freelance overflow, then an accountant, which felt painfully adult and weirdly thrilling. Money changed shape too. At first it meant survival, then breathing room, then choices. I built an emergency fund that would have seemed imaginary to my 18-year-old self. I paid off the last scraps of debt. I started investing in slow, boring ways that didn't look impressive at dinner parties but let me sleep at night. I bought a used car in cash and sat in the driver's seat for 10 full minutes before turning the key. No lender, no cosigner, no family favor. Hanging over me like a hook. Mine. That word kept getting bigger. The apartment gave way to a better one. Then, years later, to a townhouse on a quiet street lined with sycamores. That should have been enough. It was more than enough, really. But what I wanted by then wasn't display. It was peace, distance, control over the edges of my life. So when the opportunity came to buy a house outside the city, Set back from the road with enough land to disappear a little, I took it. The first time I saw it, the front path was littered with pine needles and the mailbox leaned like it had given up. The house needed work, fresh paint, better lighting, new floors in 2 rooms. But the bones were solid. And at the front of the property sat a wide iron gate between stone pillars. Rusted but elegant, the kind of entrance I used to associate with people born into certainty. I bought the house, then I rebuilt it the way I wish someone had rebuilt me when I was young. I fixed what was cracked, strengthened what mattered, added warmth where there had been cold emptiness. I painted the walls in quiet colors, installed better locks, planted trees that would take years to fully grow because by then I understood that some of the best things do. When the contractors asked if I wanted to keep the gate, I said yes, without hesitation. I had it repaired, reinforced, and fitted with cameras and an intercom. People think a gate is about status. For me, it was about choice. Who gets in, who doesn't. That was the deeper change, and it had less to do with money than anyone outside could see. I stopped saying yes because I was afraid of losing people. I stopped over-explaining boundaries to those determined not to respect them anyway. I chose friends who felt calm, not familiar chaos. I dated differently too. No more mistaking criticism for chemistry. No more chasing affection that had to be earned by shrinking. My life became quieter, healthier, cleaner around the edges. The strangest part was realizing how much of me had bloomed only after being cut off from the place that claimed to be shaping me. For years, I had believed my family's pressure was meant to make me stronger. But distance taught me something ugly and liberating. Some environments don't forge you. They choke you slowly, then call your lack of air a character flaw. Once I was gone, I could hear myself think. Once I was gone, effort stopped leaking into fear. Once I was gone, the same traits they mocked started making sense. The eye for detail, the stubborn focus, the ability to obsess over small improvements until they compounded into something undeniable. In the right soil, what looked like failure in one house became skill in another life. 7 years passed that way. Not perfectly, I still had anxious nights. Bad deals, trust misplaced in people who sounded polished and delivered chaos. There were losses too, but none of them sent me back to where I started. Because by then, I had built more than income. I had built structure. And somewhere in those 7 years, something else happened. The silence from my parents stopped feeling temporary. It became its own kind of answer. Until one night, long after I'd stopped waiting for any version of them to appear. Their faces lit up my gate camera like ghosts from a life I had already buried. For a long time, nothing happened. That was the strangest part. After the night I got thrown out, I expected some kind of aftershock. An angry message, a warning through relatives, a guilt-laced voicemail from my mother saying I had embarrassed the family. Something. But the silence came down hard and stayed there. Weeks first, then months. I checked my phone more than I want to admit. Every unknown number made my chest tighten. Every holiday carried a weird charge, like maybe this would be the day pride cracked and somebody reached out. Nobody did. My birthday passed. Then another. The family group chats changed over time. Thinner and more selective, until I realized I had quietly stopped being included in them at all. It was like being erased in administrative steps. No dramatic announcement. Just absence normalized. The first rumor reached me through Marcus, who had heard it from someone who knew one of my cousins. My parents were telling people I had chosen to leave, that I was stubborn, that I had rejected help. I laughed when he told me, but it came out wrong. Thin, not amused. There's a special kind of injury in hearing someone rewrite your abandonment into your disobedience. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to call every aunt and uncle and say, ask them what they packed for me. Ask them how long they waited before locking the door. Ask them what kind of parent watches their kid carry a duffel bag into the dark and sleeps fine afterward. I didn't call anyone. At first, that was because I was overwhelmed. Later, it was because I understood something uglier. Family systems can absorb truth and still reject it if the lie is more convenient. I had no energy for a courtroom where the verdict was already chosen. Still, the silence didn't feel clean. It came mixed with guilt, which annoyed me because I didn't think I deserved any. But guilt is rarely logical. It showed up in stupid places, buying winter boots and wondering if my mother had enough warm clothes. Seeing a father and son arguing in a hardware store and wondering whether mine ever thought about me when he passed the aisle with extension cords and work gloves. Hearing from a distant cousin that my parents were getting older and feeling that old cultural pressure creep in. The one that says blood should outrank memory. Some nights, I'd sit in my car outside my apartment after work and think about driving to their street. Not to go in. just to see the house. Check if the porch light still flickered. Check if the maple tree my father never trimmed had finally been cut down. Once, I actually drove halfway there before taking the next exit and circling back home with my hands sweating on the wheel. I told myself it was curiosity. It wasn't only that. Part of estrangement is grief with no funeral. The people are still alive, the roles are still technically there, mother, father, child, but the relationship has rotted in place. There's no ceremony for that, no casseroles, no sympathy cards. People either judge you for stepping away or pressure you to fix what you didn't break. So I kept my distance the way people keep pressure off a wound that looks closed too early. There were 2 actual attempts at contact in those 7 years, if you could call them that. The first came through my Aunt Leela about 3 years in. She invited me to lunch, which was suspicious enough on its own because she had never been interested in my life before. We sat in a diner booth under a humming neon beer sign, and after 10 minutes of small talk, she stirred her tea and said, "Your mother worries about you, you know?" I almost laughed. Instead, I asked, "Then why didn't she call?" Aunt Leela looked offended on my mother's behalf, which told me everything. "You know how stubborn your father is?" There it was. Not concern. Mediation without accountability. A bridge built entirely for me to walk across first. I left cash for my half of lunch and went home angrier than before. The second attempt was a voicemail from an unknown number around year 5. My mother's voice hesitant. She didn't say sorry. She didn't mention the night I left. She said, "We heard you're doing well. It would be nice to talk sometime." Nice. As if we had drifted apart over busy schedules and not detonated over a kitchen table. I listened to that message 6 times, deleted it, then spent the next week feeling like I had swallowed a stone. That's the part people don't understand. Not going back isn't always done with rage. Sometimes it's done shaking. Sometimes it's done while missing the version of your parents you kept hoping they would become. Sometimes it's done because every small contact leaves you bleeding in places no one else can see. Over time, I stopped expecting them. The anger cooled first, then the panic. Grief stayed longer, but it changed shape. Less like an open wound. More like scar tissue you notice in bad weather. I built my life around peace, and peace required distance. But in the months before they appeared at my gate, little things started reaching me again. A cousin I hadn't heard from in years asked where I was living these days. An uncle suddenly wanted to add me on social media. A family friend I barely remembered messaged, "Heard you've done very well for yourself." The wording stuck with me. For yourself. As if my life had become news. As if information about me was moving through rooms I wasn't in. I didn't know then what had changed on their side. Only that something had. Something sharp enough to break 7 years of silence and send 2 people into the rain after midnight. By the time I saw them on my camera, one thing was clear. They hadn't come because they finally missed me. They had come because they needed something. Need is visible from far away. Even through a grainy gate camera. Even through rain. I watched them on the screen for almost a full minute before I moved. My father kept one hand on the iron bars. Fingers curled through them as if he needed the gate itself to hold him upright. My mother stood half a step behind him, shoulders folded inward, coat dark with rain at the seams. The porch light mounted on the stone pillar flattened their faces, made every line look deeper. Age had touched them, yes. But this was more than age. This was where I set the phone down, walked to the window, and looked out toward the drive. From inside the house, the scene looked almost unreal. Wet, black asphalt. Pine branches shifting in the wind. Their car idling just beyond the entrance. One headlight slightly dimmer than the other. My gate, tall and silent, between their world and mine. For a second I was 18 again. Not because I felt small. Because my body remembered them before my mind caught up. The old rush hit first. Heart fast, jaw tight, breath gone shallow. Then another feeling rose under it. Steadier and colder. They could not reach me unless I allowed it. That was new. I went back to the console and pressed the intercom. Static cracked. My mother flinched at the sound. My father looked up sharply toward the camera lens mounted above the keypad. I saw his expression change the moment he knew I was there. Watching. Not angry, not proud. Not even embarrassed in the way I had imagined over the years. He looked cornered. "Please," my mother said again. Her voice came thin through the speaker, strained and scratchy like she had been crying for hours. "We know it's late." My thumb rested near the gate control, but I kept my hands still. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My own voice startled me. Calm, flat, more controlled than I felt. Neither of them answered right away. That silence told me plenty. They hadn't rehearsed this well. Or maybe they had, and now that they were here, all the prepared lines sounded wrong against the facts. The rain ticked against the metal bars. Somewhere farther down the road, a car passed tires, hissing on wet pavement. My father cleared his throat. "We need to speak with you. Not, how are you, not, can we see you, need again." I looked closer at him on the monitor. His coat was old and badly zipped, one side bunched near the collar. His hair had thinned at the temples. There were deep shadows under his eyes. He kept lifting his chin in little jerks, the way people do when they're trying to preserve dignity that has already started leaking away. My mother took one step forward until her face nearly filled the frame. Rain clung to her eyelashes. Just for a few minutes, she said, "Please." That word from her felt unnatural, like hearing glass bend. I hit the exterior lights from the panel. The driveway flooded with warm light, and both of them blinked hard. No hiding now. My mother's mascara had smudged into dark crescents. My father's left sleeve was damp, clear past the elbow. Their car looked packed, backseat full, a blanket visible behind the driver's side. 2 plastic folders on the dashboard, packed. That detail landed and stayed. I grabbed my keys and walked out through the front hall. The house was silent except for the soft alarm chirp as I disabled the interior sensors. My reflection moved beside me in the dark glass of framed pictures. A grown man in a fitted black sweater, barefoot on oak floors, crossing a house he owned to meet the people who once made him feel temporary in every room. When I stepped under the covered entryway, the night air hit cold and wet. I didn't open the gate. I walked down the stone path until I could see them directly through the bars. Up close was worse. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, exactly. More like the force had gone out of her. My father wouldn't meet my eyes for more than a second at a time. The man who once filled doorways now seemed careful around them. None of us spoke at first. The rain filled the space. Then my father did something I never thought I would see. He removed his hand from the bars, straightened as much as he could, and said, "We need your help." There it was. No disguise. No lecture. No demand dressed as guidance. Help. I felt something sharp move through me. Not quite satisfaction and not quite pain. Maybe both. 7 years earlier, he had stood over me and told me the world would teach me my value. Now he was standing outside my property in the dark asking for access to the life I built after surviving his lesson. My mother started crying harder when he said it out loud. "We didn't know where else to go," she whispered. That sentence changed the temperature of the night. Because people do not say that unless the ground beneath them is gone. I looked past them to the car again. The packed back seat, the folders, the engine still running, as if they couldn't risk not being able to leave fast. My mind started assembling possibilities faster than my face showed them. Debt, eviction, illness, a lawsuit, a betrayal, something involving my brother, maybe. Something that had collapsed the old hierarchy so completely they had ended up here. At this gate, using words they had never once offered me when I needed them. I kept my voice even. "What happened?" My father looked at my mother. My mother looked down at the wet gravel. Neither answered, and in that hesitation, I knew the truth was going to be ugly enough to change everything. My father answered first, but not cleanly. "It's complicated," he said, wiping rain from his forehead with the back of his hand. That old instinct was still there. Delay. Control the shape of the truth before anyone else touched it. I didn't move. "What happened?" My mother opened one of the folders through the bars with trembling fingers. Papers bent in the rain. Notices, statements, a stamped document with red lettering across the top. Even upside down. I recognized enough to understand the category before the specifics. Debt. My father exhaled through his nose like the word itself offended him. "Your brother got into trouble." My brother, of course. The golden child in our house wasn't actually a sibling in the abstract. It was Aaron. 2 years older, clean records, good grades. The son who knew how to speak in the language my parents respected. He got the better shoes, the softer tone, the assumption of potential. If he forgot something, he was busy. If I forgot something, I was careless. That was the ecosystem. And now his name was standing in the rain between us. "What kind of trouble?" I asked. No answer. My mother looked at my father, then finally said it. "He asked your father to co-sign on a business loan." That landed with a dull, almost ridiculous simplicity. Not medical catastrophe. Not kidnapping. Not some operatic disaster. Just the oldest family story in the world. Trust handed to the favorite child like a blank check. My father's jaw tightened. He said it was temporary. I looked at the folders again. Multiple notices, more than one lender, dates spread over months. How much? My mother said the number so quietly I had to ask her to repeat it. When she did, I felt my whole body go still. It was enough to wreck them. Enough that if payments had been missed long enough, the lenders would come after assets. House, car, savings, whatever little stability they had left. I looked at the packed sedan and the blanket in the back seat and understood the timeline all at once. This happened recently. Not all at once, my father muttered. That meant yes and worse. They had known, they had hidden it, denied it, managed it with pride and borrowed time until the math finally overpowered denial. I could see it now. The slow unraveling, late notices tucked into drawers. Arguments behind closed doors, my mother telling relatives everything was fine. My father believing Aaron would fix it if given one more month. And Aaron, I asked. My mother's face folded in on itself. He left. I almost thought I misheard her. Left where? We don't know, she whispered. The rain got louder then. Or maybe I was just hearing more sharply. Aaron had taken the loan, failed whatever venture he had sold them, and disappeared. Phone off. Address useless. The son they had trusted with everything had dropped the whole family into freefall and walked away from the wreckage. The irony was so brutal it almost felt written. And still, I didn't feel triumph. That surprised me. I looked at my father, at the stiffness in his neck, the wet hem of his pants, the exhaustion he was trying to hold together with posture alone. I looked at my mother, who had spent years slicing me apart with controlled disappointment, now clutching damp paperwork like it might keep her from drowning. For one flicker of a second, I saw them not as giants from my childhood, but as aging people who had made terrible choices and then been broken open by them. Then my father ruined the softness. We wouldn't be here. He said, if we had any other option. There it was again. Need without ownership. Still no apology. Still no naming of what they had done to get here. I folded my arms. What do you want from me? My mother answered too fast. Alone. Just until we can sort things out? Alone. As if we were acquaintances discussing temporary liquidity. As if there wasn't a graveyard between us. How did you find out where I live? My father hesitated. My mother did not. Family talks. Meaning they had been asking around, tracking me quietly. My skin went cold in a different way. Then came the tactics. Not all at once. Layered. Familiar. My mother said, we are still your parents. My father added, family is family. No matter what happened. No matter what happened. A phrase built to bleach details. Then religion arrived, right on schedule. My mother pressed a hand to her chest and said, God sees how children treat their mother and father. I actually laughed at that. Short, sharp, it escaped before I could stop it. The sound seemed to shock all three of us. Children, I said, you stopped using that word when I needed one. My father looked offended, which was almost impressive under the circumstances. We were trying to make you responsible. The old script, there it was. Not cruelty. Tough love. Not abandonment, a lesson. Not the word worthless. Motivation. If they could rename the violence, maybe they could stand under it without shame. My hands tightened against my sleeves. And calling me worthless, I asked, was that responsibility too? Neither answered. My mother started crying again and switched tactics. We didn't mean things the way you took them. That sentence hit harder than the rest, because it asked me to carry their intention and my injury at the same time, then prioritize the version that made them easier to live with. The folders sagged in her hands. The red stamps bled at the edges from rain. My father swallowed once and looked away toward the car. In that glance, I saw fear. Real fear. Mortgage gone. Credit destroyed. Pride dead. Maybe nowhere left after this. They were suffering. That part was not theater. And that was the trap hidden inside the moment. When the people who harmed you become helpless, the past doesn't vanish. It crowds closer. Cruel words stand shoulder to shoulder with human frailty. Memory says, protect yourself. Conscience says they are still people. Blood says one thing. Wounds say another. My mother gripped the bars and whispered, please don't leave us out here. I believed her desperation. I just didn't know yet what believing it required from me. I didn't open the gate all the way, just enough to let them walk through while I stood back and watched. No hugs, no reaching, no pretending. I led them not into the main living room, but into the sitting area off the foyer. A smaller room with 2 armchairs, 1 long sofa, and windows facing the front drive. Deliberate, close to the door. easy to end. My mother noticed that, so did my father. There was a towel folded on the side table. I slid it toward them and said, "You can sit, not welcome home. Not make yourselves comfortable, you can sit." They lowered themselves onto the sofa like people arriving at an office where the outcome had already been decided. Rainwater darkened the cushions under their coats. My father kept the folder on his knees. My mother held her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles looked white. The lamp beside them cast a soft gold circle across the room, and for a strange second the whole scene looked respectable enough to fool a stranger. Then I remembered why they were here. I stayed standing. That changed everything. At 18, every argument happened with me cornered. Back against a counter, back near a doorway, back in a chair while they stood over me with certainty. Now they had to tilt their heads up to look at me. It wasn't a power game I had planned. It was simply the truth of the room. "What exactly are you asking for?" I said. My father shifted. "We need enough to stop the foreclosure process. Then time to work out the rest." He said it like a business proposal. "Numbers first, damage control." Still trying to act as if the only crisis here was financial. I nodded once, and after that, my mother blinked. "After that, after you get what you came for," I said, "what happens then?" We go back to 7 years of silence. Neither of them answered. I finally sat down across from them, not because they had earned comfort, but because I wanted them to hear me without the distortion of anger. My pulse was pounding hard enough to feel in my throat. I could hear the old clock in the hallway, soft, steady, nothing like the one in my parents' kitchen. This one did not sound like judgment. "You want money?" I said. "Fine. But before we talk about that, you're going to listen." My father inhaled to interrupt. I lifted a hand. "No. You've had 7 years of your version. You can hear mine." He went still. I looked at my mother first, then at him. "When you called me worthless, it didn't end that night. It followed me everywhere. It sat with me on strangers' couches. It rode buses with me at 5 in the morning. It showed up every time a manager corrected me, every time rent was due, every time I made one mistake and felt like my whole life was about to collapse." My mother's eyes dropped to the carpet. "You didn't just throw me out," I said. "You taught me that love could be revoked the second I disappointed you. You taught me that home was conditional, that safety could be switched off because I chose the wrong future for your pride." My father's jaw worked once. We were angry. I laughed without humor. Angry people say cruel things. They don't lock the door and go to sleep. That landed. His face changed. Slightly. Not enough to call it remorse yet, but enough to show impact. I kept going because if I stopped, I knew they would run for the nearest excuse. "I had $32. I said. "Do you understand that 32? I counted coins for food. I carried my clothes around because I didn't know if I'd have a place to leave them. I learned how invisible desperation can be when you're trying not to smell like it." My mother covered her mouth. I didn't soften. "I almost called home more than once." I said. "Not because you were right, because I was scared, because I was hungry, because I was 18 and pretending to be tougher than I was. And every time, I remembered exactly how your voices sounded when you said I was nothing." Tears slid down my mother's face. Quiet tears. My father stared at the folder so hard it looked like he was trying to read through it. Then came the sentence I had wanted them to hear for years, though I had never imagined saying it in this house. "I built all of this," I said, glancing around the room, "in spite of you. Not because your cruelty made me strong, because I had no choice but to survive it." Silence. The kind that makes every tiny sound matter. The radiator clicking in the wall. Rain still dripping from the edge of the roof outside. My mother's unsteady breathing. Finally, she spoke. We were wrong. Simple. Barely audible, but real enough that the room changed. I looked at my father. He took longer. When he finally raised his head, there was no authority left in his face. Only exhaustion and something that might have been shame, though he wore it awkwardly, like an unfamiliar coat. "I should never have called you that," he said. "I should never have put you out. Not perfect. Not poetic. But not denial either." Then, almost immediately, he spoiled it by adding, "We thought pressure would force you to grow up." There was the deflection. The need to keep one hand on the old story. I nodded slowly. "You don't get to wrap abuse in strategy because the outcome embarrasses you less." He flinched. "Good." My mother leaned forward. "We know we failed you. That was better, more honest." But then she added, "Please don't punish us forever." And there it was again. Their discomfort placed beside my history as if the two should now be balanced equally. I stood and walked to the window for a moment, looking out at the wet gate under the lights. My reflection hovered in the glass over the dark driveway. Behind me, they said nothing. For once, they were waiting on my terms. When I turned back, the decision had taken shape. "I'm not giving you money tonight," I said. My mother looked stricken. My father's shoulders hardened. Before either could speak, I continued. "But I'm not sending you away blind either." That got their attention. "I'll pay for a hotel for 3 nights," I said. "Tomorrow, I'll have my attorney and financial advisor look at these documents. If there's a way to stop the immediate collapse without handing you cash directly, I'll consider it. Payments to institutions. A structured plan. No open-ended rescue. No moving in here. No pretending we're a family again because you need something." My father opened his mouth, closed it. My mother whispered, "You'd do that." "I'll do what I can live with," I said. "That's different." And in the silence that followed, all three of us understood the same thing. This was not reconciliation. It was judgment with boundaries. I booked them 2 rooms at a motel 12 minutes away, not because they were a couple who needed comfort, because distance mattered. Clean sheets, working locks, and enough space for me to breathe before morning. I called from the kitchen while they sat in the foyer in damp silence. The woman at the front desk sounded bored, asked for my card number twice, and told me check-in closed in 20 minutes. The normality of her voice felt surreal. When I hung up, I wrote the address on a piece of stationery from my desk. My father took it without meeting my eyes. My mother stood like she wanted to say something softer, something maternal, something that could shorten 7 years into one emotional moment. But whatever she was searching for did not arrive in time. I walked them to the door, opened it, and waited. That was the boundary. I would not humiliate them. I would not absorb them either. On the drive out, their taillights moved slowly down the dark road, red against black, wet pavement, until the gate shut behind them and the night swallowed everything. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening to the motor settle. The property went quiet again. Pine branches stirred overhead. Somewhere in the back of the house, the ice maker dropped a tray with a clatter that sounded absurdly cheerful. Then I went inside, locked the door, and sat alone at the dining table until dawn. The next day, I did exactly what I said I would do. My attorney reviewed the foreclosure notices and debt documents. My financial advisor looked at the loan structure, the missed payments, the penalties already accumulating. The verdict was ugly but not hopeless. There was a narrow path to stop the immediate loss of the house if certain balances were brought current fast and if my parents agreed. In writing, to sell the property within a fixed timeline instead of trying to preserve the life they could no longer afford. I met them that afternoon in a conference room above my attorney's office. Neutral ground, glass walls, carafe of stale coffee in the corner, a box of tissues placed too neatly at the center of the table. They looked smaller there than they had at my gate, less like parents, more like clients with a history they didn't want in the file. I didn't hand them cash. I paid the overdue amount directly to halt the immediate foreclosure process. Nothing more, no blank rescue, no money to Aaron, no private account transfer they could later fold into family mythology. In return, they signed documents agreeing to financial oversight on this issue only. The sale of the house and repayment terms if any remaining estate assets allowed for it later. My attorney made every sentence plain. There would be no confusion, no misunderstanding. My father signed first, the pen scraping hard enough to leave grooves in the paper. My mother cried quietly while she signed hers. When it was done, no one hugged. No one used the word healing. That would have been too easy, too false. My mother thanked me in a voice that shook. My father took longer. He looked at the papers, then at me, and said, "You didn't have to do this." He was right. That mattered. "I know," I said. For the first time in my life, helping them did not feel like obedience. It felt like authorship. I was deciding the shape of my own character, not submitting to theirs. That difference changed everything. People hear that I helped and assume forgiveness arrived all at once, clean and glowing. It didn't. Forgiveness, at least for me, was not a warm flood. It was quieter, more practical. It was the gradual decision to stop feeding myself their voices, to stop dragging the old sentence worthlessness behind me like a chain just because it came from people who helped make me. It was understanding that what they said about me at 18 was never a prophecy. It was an exposure of their fear, their rigidity, their need to control what they did not understand and access. That was separate. I did not invite them into my daily life after that. I did not hand them keys. I did not bring them into holidays, finances, decisions, or the private rooms of my peace. We spoke a few more times in the weeks that followed, always about the sale process, always brief. My mother tried once to drift into nostalgia. My father tried once to ask about my business in the tone of a man studying a language he used to mock. I answered politely. Then, I ended the calls. They were no longer entitled to intimacy just because they had finally learned my value. That, more than money, was the real gate. Months later, after their house sold and the crisis settled into whatever older age and consequence would now be for them, I drove past my first apartment building by accident. The one with the sunlight in the kitchen. There was a young guy on the front steps carrying a laundry basket with one arm and balancing a pizza box on top. He looked exhausted, hopeful to be the exact kind of tired I remembered from those years when every inch forward had to be earned in private. I sat at the light and watched him disappear inside. And I thought about how easy it is for people to confuse worth with approval, a parent's approval, a report card, a title, a number in the bank. A room full of strangers finally nodding because the world has endorsed you loudly enough for your family to notice. But none of those things reached back through time and created me. Survival did. Discipline did. The decision not to collapse into the version of myself they predicted did. Worth was never hiding in their permission. It was there the first night I kept walking with a bag on my shoulder and nowhere safe to go. It was there when I counted coins and still chose not to crawl back. It was there in the ugly first drafts, the long shifts, the basement room, the contracts, the therapy sessions, the boundaries. By the time my parents stood at my gate begging, they were too late to define me. All they could do was reveal how completely wrong they had been. And once I understood that, the old word lost its last piece of power. I could help them without kneeling. I could forgive without reopening the door they slammed. I could remember everything, and still refuse to let it be the thing that speaks for me now. A few weeks after everything settled, I checked the gate camera one morning for no reason at all. Habit? Maybe. The driveway was empty. Sunlight lay across the stone pillars in long, pale bands. A delivery van had passed earlier. A squirrel jumped along the top of the fence and vanished into the trees. Nothing dramatic, nothing waiting outside, just quiet. That was the point. For years, I used to imagine closure as something louder, a speech, a perfect apology, a moment so clean it would erase the confusion and leave only certainty behind. But real endings rarely arrive that way. Sometimes closure is a gate that opens only as far as you decide. Sometimes it's paperwork in a conference room. Sometimes it's hearing the people who broke you ask for help and realizing you no longer need their version of you to survive the conversation. They threw me out at 18, calling me worthless. 7 years later, they came to my gate needing the very person they had dismissed. That part is true. But the part that mattered most wasn't the irony. It wasn't even the reversal. It was who I became in the distance between those two nights. The kid standing on the sidewalk with a duffel bag and nowhere to go would have believed that success alone could heal everything. That one day, if he just worked hard enough, earned enough, built enough, then all the old damage would fall away like dust. It doesn't happen like that. Success can buy safety. It can buy therapy. It can buy time. Privacy.com and options. Those things matter. They matter a lot. But money doesn't climb back into your nervous system and untie every knot fear left there. A nice house doesn't automatically silence the voices that once lived in your head rent-free. A gate doesn't protect you from memory unless you learn how to guard the inside too. That took longer, and maybe that's why the decision I made that night still feels right. I didn't become cruel just because cruelty had shaped me. I didn't hand them everything just because they shared my blood. I helped without abandoning myself. That was the line. Some people will hear this and say I should have shut the gate and walked away. Some will say I should have let them in, forgiven everything, and started over because family is family. But life is usually messier than slogans. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse revenge without volunteering for further damage. Sometimes compassion is not access. Sometimes helping someone through a crisis does not mean inviting them back into the rooms they once poisoned. I still think about that night more than I expected to. Not every day. Not in the obsessive way I used to replay the past. More like a bell that rings faintly in the distance now and then. A reminder of how quickly power can reverse, of how long words can live inside a person, of how survival changes shape over time. At 18, survival was finding a couch, a meal, a shift, a place to leave my bag. At 25, survival meant protecting the peace I had built from anyone who arrived too late asking to borrow it. If you've ever had to set a boundary with someone who thought love gave them the right to wound you, then you probably know how complicated this kind of ending feels. It doesn't fit neatly into hero or villain. It doesn't tie itself up with one apology. And maybe that's why stories like this stay with people. Because deep down, a lot of us are still figuring out the difference between forgiveness and surrender. My parents did lose the house. They didn't lose everything, but they lost the version of themselves that believed they would always be in control. Aaron never really came back into the picture. Last I heard, he resurfaced in another state with a different story for different people. I wasn't surprised. Families like mine are full of edited versions. As for me, I stayed here, in the house I chose, behind the gate I paid for, inside a life built slowly enough to trust. And every now and then, when I walk past the front windows at night and see my own reflection in the glass, I think about that 18-year-old kid again. The one standing on a dark sidewalk with $32 in a sketchbook stuffed in a bag. He thought he had been discarded. He thought being unwanted meant being unworthy. He was wrong. Or maybe more accurately, they were. So I want to ask you something. If the people who once threw you away showed up at your gate years later, desperate and needing help, what would you have done? Would you open it? Would you turn them away? And if you chose to help, do you think helping someone requires forgetting what they did to you? Tell me in the comments. I really want to hear where you stand on that line between compassion and self-respect. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and stick around. There are more stories here about resilience, betrayal, family pressure, and the hard kind of transformation that doesn't happen on camera. Until the ending finally knocks at the gate,